In 1843, an entire nation was about to walk 2,000 miles across an untamed continent, carrying everything they owned in canvas-covered wagons pulled by oxen. They would face raging rivers, towering mountains, deadly diseases, and the vast emptiness of the American frontier. Most had never traveled more than 20 miles from where they were born. Yet somehow, they believed they could reach a place called Oregon, a mythical land of free farms and endless opportunity that lay beyond the edge of the known world. Close your eyes and step back in time to witness one of the greatest migrations in human history. Feel the cool morning mist hanging low over Independence, Missouri, a bustling frontier town that serves as the launching point for an impossible dream. The air fills with the gentle sounds of final preparation. The soft thud of canvas being stretched over wooden wagon hoops, the rhythmic clinking of metal tools being packed for the last time, and the hushed conversations of families about to risk everything on a promise they've never seen. Independence wasn't chosen by accident as the launching point for westward migration. This Missouri town sat at the perfect confluence of geography and commerce, where the Missouri River made its great bend toward the north. Here, the last reliable stores, blacksmiths, and supply depots offered emigrants their final chance to purchase necessities before venturing into 2,000 miles of wilderness. The town streets, normally quiet, now bustled with an unusual energy as hundreds of families converged from across the eastern United States. Picture Sarah Chen, a fictional but representative emigrant, standing beside her family's wagon in the early morning light. Like many real emigrants, she carries with her a small leather journal, its pages soon to be filled with the wonder and hardship of the trail ahead. The Oregon Territory beckons with promises that seem almost too good to be true: free land, 320 acres for a single man, 640 for a married couple, in a place described as having soil so rich that crops grew with minimal effort, forests so vast they seemed endless, and rivers teeming with salmon. But what truly drove families like Sarah's to abandon everything familiar? The economic depression of 1837 had left many Americans struggling to make ends meet. Farmers in Missouri and Arkansas faced soil exhaustion from decades of intensive farming. The promise of Oregon wasn't just about land, it was about renewal, about the chance to start over in a place where hard work could guarantee prosperity. The Oregon Trail itself was not a single path, but rather a network of routes spanning roughly 2,170 miles from Independence to Oregon City in the Willamette Valley. This wasn't a road in any sense that we might understand today. It was a series of worn tracks created by thousands of wagon wheels, animal hooves, and human feet, gradually wearing away grass and earth to create visible paths across the prairie. As Sarah's family loads their wagon, a modest prairie schooner with a canvas top stretched over wooden bows, they're participating in what would become known as the Great Migration. The wagon itself tells a story of careful consideration and compromise. Too large, and it would bog down in mud or break an axle on rocky terrain. Too small, and they couldn't carry enough supplies for the 5-month journey ahead. Inside their wagon, space is at a premium. Each item has been carefully selected for its necessity and utility. Barrels of flour, bacon, and hardtack, the staples that will sustain them across the continent. Tools for repairs, spare wagon parts, rope, and leather for patches. Personal items are limited to the absolute essentials: a Bible, perhaps a daguerreotype of relatives left behind, children's treasured toys, and medicines that might mean the difference between life and death on the trail. The sounds of preparation create a symphony of anticipation. Oxen low softly as they're fitted with their heavy wooden yokes. These patient beasts, slower than horses but more reliable and less prone to theft by Native Americans, will pull the wagons across mountain passes and through rivers. Their steady pace, about 2 miles per hour, will dictate the rhythm of life for the next several months. Around Sarah's wagon, other families make similar preparations. The Hendersons from Kentucky, with their 6 children and elderly grandmother. The Muller family from Ohio, German immigrants seeking their second fresh start in America. The Washingtons, a free black family from Illinois, facing additional dangers and discrimination but equally determined to claim their place in Oregon's promised land. As the sun rises higher, painting the prairie grass in shades of gold and green, Wagon Master Captain John Morrison calls the emigrants together. A weathered man in his 50s, Morrison has made this journey 3 times before, guiding groups of settlers through the complexities and dangers ahead. His voice carries the authority of experience as he explains the rules that will govern their traveling community for the next 5 months. The wagon train will form a moving village, complete with its own social structure, laws, and customs. Decisions will be made collectively, disputes settled by elected judges, and everyone will contribute to the common good. Children will walk alongside the wagons to preserve space and reduce wear on the animals. Adults will take turns standing guard at night, watching for signs of trouble in the vast darkness of the plains. As the emigrants listen to Morrison's words, the magnitude of their undertaking begins to sink in. They're not just crossing a continent, they're temporarily abandoning civilization itself, venturing into a space where the nearest doctor, store, or law enforcement officer might be hundreds of miles away. They will rely entirely on each other, their own skills, and their faith in the promise that lies at the end of the trail. The morning progresses with final preparations and farewells. Letters are written to relatives who may never see the emigrants again. Children play one last game with friends they're leaving behind. Adults check and recheck their supplies, knowing that forgotten items cannot be easily replaced once the journey begins. And then, sometime around mid-morning, Captain Morrison gives the signal. Wagons ho! The call echoes down the line of 37 wagons, and slowly, creaking under the weight of dreams and possessions, the wagon train begins to move. Oxen lean into their yokes, wheels begin to turn, and families wave goodbye to the last vestiges of the familiar world. The Oregon Trail begins not with dramatic fanfare, but with the simple, steady rhythm of walking. Step by step, mile by mile, the emigrants begin their transformation from settled Americans to pioneers, carrying with them the hopes of a nation expanding toward its manifest destiny. The first weeks on the Oregon Trail unfold with a deceptive gentleness that lulls many emigrants into false confidence about the journey ahead. The prairie stretches endlessly in all directions, a sea of grass that waves in the constant wind like water. The monotony is broken only by the occasional grove of cottonwood trees marking a creek bed, or the distant silhouette of a buffalo herd moving like a dark cloud across the horizon. Sarah's journal entries from these early days capture the mixture of wonder and adjustment that characterized the beginning of the trail experience. May 15, 1843, the prairie is more beautiful than I had imagined. The grass grows so tall that little Emma disappears completely when she wanders from the wagon. Today we saw our first buffalo, a magnificent creature that watched us pass with ancient eyes before disappearing into a ravine. The rhythm of trail life quickly establishes itself with the reliability of sunrise. The day begins before dawn with the sound of Captain Morrison's bugle calling the camp to life. Campfires are rekindled from carefully banked coals, coffee is boiled in tin pots, and breakfast is prepared from the dwindling supplies of fresh food carried from Independence. Bacon sizzles in iron skillets while biscuits bake in Dutch ovens buried in coals. By 7 o'clock, the wagons are being loaded and the oxen yoked. The process requires skill developed through repetition. Too tight, and the wooden yoke will rub raw sores on the animals' necks. Too loose, and the oxen cannot pull effectively. Children help by gathering buffalo chips, the dried dung that serves as the primary fuel on the treeless plains. What initially disgusted refined Eastern sensibilities quickly becomes routine necessity. The wagon train moves in a carefully organized formation designed for both efficiency and defense. A scout rides ahead, searching for the best route and watching for potential dangers. The wagons follow in a long line, spaced far enough apart to avoid each other's dust but close enough for mutual support. Livestock, cattle, horses, and spare oxen, are herded alongside or behind the wagons by mounted drovers. Walking becomes the emigrant's primary form of exercise and transportation. Riding in the wagons is uncomfortable and impractical. The constant jolting over rough ground makes it nearly impossible to rest or engage in activities like sewing or reading. Instead, families walk beside their wagons, covering 15 to 20 miles per day at the steady pace of the oxen. The social dynamics of the wagon train begin to emerge during these early weeks. Families that seemed compatible in independence discover personality conflicts when forced into close quarters day after day. Leadership roles naturally develop based on competence and experience rather than Eastern social status. Dr. Marcus Whitman, a missionary traveling with his wife Narcissa, finds his medical skills invaluable, while young Tom Henderson proves surprisingly adept at finding water and selecting campsites. Evening brings the daily ritual of forming the wagon circle. This defensive formation, immortalized in countless Western films, serves practical purposes beyond protection from potential attacks. The circle creates a natural corral for the livestock and defines the boundaries of the temporary community. Inside the circle, cooking fires are lit, children play in the central space, and adults gather to share news, make decisions, and enjoy the brief respite from walking. The emigrant's diet during these early weeks consists primarily of salt pork, hardtack, beans, and coffee. Fresh game supplements the monotonous fare when hunters succeed in bringing down deer, antelope, or buffalo. Wild greens gathered along the way, lamb's quarters, wild onions, and prairie turnips, help prevent scurvy and add variety to meals that quickly become repetitive. Water presents the first serious challenge of the journey. The clear streams flowing into the Missouri River gradually become fewer and farther apart as the wagon train moves west into drier country. Water barrels must be carefully rationed, and every stream crossing becomes an opportunity to refill containers and allow the animals to drink their fill. The quality of water varies dramatically. Some streams run clear and sweet, while others are alkaline or contaminated with minerals that cause digestive problems for both humans and animals. As the emigrants adjust to trail life, they begin to encounter the first evidence of those who traveled before them. Carved names on rocks marked the passage of earlier wagon trains. Abandoned items, furniture too heavy to continue carrying, broken wagon wheels, personal possessions sacrificed to reduce weight, litter the trail like breadcrumbs marking the path to Oregon. The graves begin appearing in the second week. Simple wooden crosses or piles of stones mark the final resting places of emigrants who began the journey with the same hopes and dreams as Sarah's party but fell victim to accident, disease, or the simple wearing down of human endurance. Each grave serves as a sobering reminder that the Oregon Trail is not merely an adventure but a genuine test of survival. Native American encounters during these early weeks are generally peaceful and commercial in nature. Trading posts operated by tribes like the Kansa and Osage offer opportunities to purchase fresh meat, vegetables, and locally made goods. These interactions challenged many immigrants' preconceptions about Native Americans, revealing complex societies with their own forms of government, trade relationships, and cultural traditions. The landscape gradually changes as the wagon train moves west. The rich, black soil of Missouri gives way to the lighter earth of Kansas Territory. Trees become scarcer, and the grass grows shorter and more drought-resistant. Buffalo become more numerous, and their presence transforms the ecosystem in ways both beneficial and challenging for the emigrants. Weather during the early weeks can be unpredictable and violent. Spring thunderstorms sweep across the plains with little warning, bringing torrential rain, hail, and lightning. The wagons offer little protection from such storms, and families huddle under canvas covers while wind threatens to overturn their homes. Flash floods can transform peaceful creeks into raging torrents within minutes, forcing delays and dangerous crossings. Despite these challenges, the early weeks of the Oregon Trail journey retain an element of novelty and adventure that keeps spirits generally high. The emigrants are still relatively close to civilization, their supplies are adequate, and the most difficult terrain lies ahead. They sleep each night with the satisfaction of miles covered and the growing confidence that they can successfully complete their transcontinental journey. As May turns to June, the wagon train approaches its first major landmark. Alcove Spring, a beautiful natural formation in present-day Kansas where many emigrant parties stop to rest, repair equipment, and prepare for the more challenging terrain ahead. Here, the gentle introduction to trail life ends, and the true test of the Oregon Trail begins. The North Platte River appears on the horizon like a ribbon of silver threading through the vast expanse of the Great Plains. For emigrants in 1843, reaching this waterway marked a crucial milestone. They had successfully completed roughly 1/4 of their journey to Oregon. But more than a measure of progress, the Platte River represented something far more significant. It would serve as their highway, their compass, and their lifeline for the next several hundred miles. Native Americans had long called the Platte, Nebraska, meaning flat water, a name that perfectly captured the river's essential character. Wide and shallow, braided with sandbars and islands, the Platte meandered through the plains in a broad valley that provided a natural corridor through otherwise trackless grassland. French traders later named it Rivière Platte for its plate-like flatness, and American emigrants would discover both the advantages and frustrations of following this unusual waterway west. The Platte River Valley creates its own microclimate, a green corridor of life cutting through the increasingly arid high plains. Cottonwood trees line the banks, their broad leaves rustling in the constant prairie wind. Willows and wild roses grow in the bottomland, while buffalo grass and wildflowers carpet the valley floor. The river itself moves deceptively slowly, its muddy brown water carrying enormous amounts of sediment picked up during its journey across the plains. Sarah's wagon train settled into the rhythm of river travel with relief and growing confidence. The uncertainty of route finding that had characterized their early weeks on the trail largely disappeared. Captain Morrison no longer needed to scout extensively for the day's path. They simply followed the Platte, staying on high ground when possible to avoid the soft mud and quicksand that made the bottomlands treacherous after rain. Water, that precious commodity that had required careful rationing during the crossing of Kansas Territory, became abundant along the Platte. However, the emigrants quickly discovered that quantity did not ensure quality. The river's muddy water required settling and filtering before it became palatable, and even then it retained a gritty texture and mineral taste that took some adjustment. "The water is thick enough to plow," wrote one emigrant, while another noted that you had to chew it before swallowing. The Platte Valley became a natural gathering place for the great buffalo herds of the Central Plains. These massive animals, numbering in the millions, moved in seasonal migrations that had shaped the ecology and human history of the Great Plains for thousands of years. For the emigrants, encountering these herds provided both wonder and practical challenges. Buffalo hunting became a regular activity for the men of the wagon train, though it proved more dangerous and difficult than many had anticipated. The shaggy beasts appeared docile from a distance, but a wounded buffalo could charge with surprising speed and devastating force. Successful hunters provided fresh meat for the entire party, a welcome change from the salt pork and hardtack that formed the staples of the trail diet. The presence of massive buffalo herds also created logistical problems for the wagon train. A herd crossing the trail could force delays of several hours or even days, as thousands of animals moved with single-minded purpose toward water or fresh grazing. The emigrants learned patience during these encounters, using the time to rest their oxen, repair equipment, and socialize with other wagon parties they might encounter at the same bottleneck. Chimney Rock, rising dramatically from the valley floor like a natural lighthouse, became the most famous landmark along the Platte River Highway. This towering spire of sandstone and clay, shaped by millions of years of wind and water erosion, could be seen for days before the wagon train actually reached it. Emigrants used Chimney Rock as a milestone, a reference point, and a natural post office where they carved their names and left messages for friends following behind. The rock formations along the Platte told the geological story of ancient seas and uplifting mountains. Courthouse Rock and Jail Rock, Scott's Bluff, and dozens of smaller formations created a landscape that seemed almost alien to emigrants accustomed to the gentle hills and forests of the eastern United States. These rocks also provided practical benefits. They offered shelter from storms, sources of good water in their springs, and elevated viewpoints for spotting game or potential dangers. Native American presence along the Platte corridor intensified as the wagon train moved west. The Pawnee, Sioux, and Cheyenne peoples had established seasonal camps and hunting grounds throughout the valley. Initial encounters were generally peaceful, centered around trade rather than conflict. Native Americans offered fresh meat, horses, and handcrafted goods in exchange for manufactured items like knives, guns, ammunition, and cloth. These trading encounters provided the emigrants with their first sustained contact with Native American cultures, challenging many preconceptions and stereotypes. They discovered sophisticated societies with complex political structures, rich spiritual traditions, and intimate knowledge of the land they were crossing. Many emigrants recorded their surprise at finding Native Americans who spoke English, understood European customs, and proved skilled negotiators in trade relationships. The social dynamics within the wagon train continued to evolve during the weeks along the Platte. The initial politeness and cooperation that characterized the early days of the journey gradually gave way to more complex relationships as personalities clashed and the stress of constant travel wore on everyone's patience. Leadership disputes arose over route selection, rest stops, and resource allocation. Children adapted to trail life with remarkable resilience, turning the journey into an extended adventure. They collected interesting rocks and flowers, played games while walking beside the wagons, and developed friendships that transcended the social boundaries that might have separated them in established communities. However, the trail also posed unique dangers for young people: fast-moving streams, stampeding buffalo, and the constant threat of becoming separated from the wagon train in the vast landscape. Women faced particular challenges along the Platte River Highway. The traditional domestic roles that had defined their lives in settled communities became complicated by the demands of trail travel. Cooking over open fires, washing clothes in muddy river water, and maintaining some semblance of cleanliness and order in primitive conditions required constant adaptation and ingenuity. The daily routine along the Platte developed its own rhythm, dictated by the river's geography and the needs of the animals. Morning departures came early to take advantage of cooler temperatures and to cover maximum distance before the heat of midday made travel uncomfortable. Noon stops allowed the oxen to rest and graze while families prepared simple meals and sought shade wherever it could be found. Evening camps were selected based on access to water, grass for the animals, and shelter from the constant wind that swept across the plains. The nightly formation of the wagon circle became a social ritual as much as a defensive measure, creating a temporary community where news was shared, problems discussed, and entertainment provided through singing, storytelling, and occasional dancing. As June advanced toward July, the wagon train followed the Platte toward the Rocky Mountains, whose snow-covered peaks began to appear on the western horizon like clouds that never moved. The emigrants had successfully navigated one of the easier sections of the Oregon Trail, but ahead lay challenges that would test their endurance, resourcefulness, and determination in ways they could barely imagine. The gentle highway of the Platte River had served them well, providing water, fuel, and a clear path west. But as they prepared to leave this familiar corridor behind, the emigrants began to understand that the most difficult portion of their journey still lay ahead, in the mountain passes and desert crossings that would ultimately determine who succeeded in reaching the promised land of Oregon. The Rocky Mountains rise from the plains like a wall built by giants, their snow-capped peaks piercing the sky and creating their own weather systems in the thin air of high altitude. For emigrants following the Oregon Trail in 1843, these mountains represented both the most beautiful and most dangerous portion of their transcontinental journey. The relatively gentle travel along the Platte River had prepared them for distance but not for the vertical challenges that lay ahead. South Pass, the emigrants' gateway through the Continental Divide, defied expectations in the most wonderful way possible. Rather than a narrow, treacherous gap between towering peaks, South Pass opened as a broad, gently rolling saddle of land nearly 20 miles wide. This natural wonder, sitting at 7,550 feet above sea level, allowed wagon trains to cross the backbone of North America without the extreme difficulty that characterized other mountain passes. Native American tribes had used South Pass for generations as a major travel route, and their knowledge eventually reached American fur traders like Jedediah Smith and Thomas Fitzpatrick, who recognized its significance for transcontinental travel. The pass represented one of only 3 practical wagon routes through the entire Rocky Mountain chain, making it quite literally the key to western expansion. Sarah's wagon train approached South Pass in early July, when wildflowers carpeted the high meadows in brilliant displays of color. Indian paintbrush glowed red among the sage, while lupin created patches of deep blue that seemed to reflect the intense sky. The air at this altitude felt thin and clear, making distant objects appear startlingly close and giving the landscape an almost ethereal quality. The crossing of South Pass marked a profound psychological milestone for the emigrants. They had reached the Continental Divide, the point where streams flow either east toward the Atlantic Ocean or west toward the Pacific. Water that fell as snow on the eastern slope would eventually reach the Gulf of Mexico, while moisture on the western slope would find its way to the Columbia River and the Pacific coast. Captain Morrison gathered the wagon train at the actual summit for a brief ceremony that acknowledged the significance of this moment. Families collected water from streams on both sides of the divide, symbolically carrying the essence of their old homes toward their new destinations. Children who had been born east of the Mississippi were now west of the Continental Divide, having crossed the great geographic barrier that had long separated the settled United States from the Oregon Territory. The landscape west of South Pass introduced the emigrants to the high desert environment of the Great Basin, a region unlike anything they had previously experienced. Sagebrush stretched to the horizon in a silver-green sea that released its distinctive, sharp scent with every footstep. The climate became dramatically drier, and water sources grew more scarce and precious. Fort Bridger appeared in the distance like a mirage, its log walls and American flag providing the first evidence of civilization the emigrants had seen since leaving Fort Laramie hundreds of miles behind. This trading post, established by mountain man Jim Bridger, served as a crucial resupply point and information center where wagon trains could rest, repair equipment, and gather intelligence about the trail conditions ahead. The fort buzzed with activity during the peak traveling season, as multiple wagon trains converged to take advantage of its services. Emigrants traded worn-out oxen for fresh animals, purchased supplies to replace items lost or consumed during the journey, and sought advice from experienced guides about the challenging terrain ahead. The presence of other travelers provided opportunities to exchange news from back east and to form new traveling partnerships with parties heading toward the same destinations. Jim Bridger himself, when present at the fort, proved to be a valuable source of information about Western geography and Native American relations. A legendary figure even in his own time, Bridger had explored more of the American West than perhaps any other individual, and his knowledge of trails, water sources, and seasonal conditions could mean the difference between success and disaster for emigrant parties. From Fort Bridger, the Oregon Trail faced one of its most notorious challenges, the crossing of the Bear River Mountains and the descent into the Bear Lake Valley. This section of trail required emigrants to navigate steep grades, loose rock surfaces, and narrow passages that tested both their equipment and their nerve. The ascent into the Bear River Mountains pushed both animals and humans to their limits. Oxen strained against their yokes as wagons climbed grades that seemed almost impossibly steep. Emigrants often had to double-team their animals, using extra oxen to help pull each wagon up the steepest sections, then returning for the next vehicle in an exhausting process that could take hours to move the entire train just a few miles. The descent proved even more dangerous than the climb. Steep downhill grades threatened to push wagons faster than the oxen could control them, creating the constant danger of runaway vehicles that could destroy equipment and injure or kill people and animals. Emigrants learned to chain wagon wheels to create makeshift brakes, attach ropes to trees to slow their descent, and use every available technique to maintain control on treacherous slopes. Bear Lake, nestled in a high mountain valley, provided a welcome respite from the challenges of mountain travel. This beautiful body of water, so blue it seemed artificial, offered excellent fishing, fresh water for drinking and washing, and grass for the animals that had been subsisting on sparse high-country vegetation. Many wagon trains declared a rest day at Bear Lake to recover from the mountain crossing and prepare for the challenges ahead. The Soda Springs region introduced emigrants to one of the geological wonders of the American West. Natural carbonated springs bubbled from the earth, creating formations of mineral deposits and providing water that tasted remarkably like artificially carbonated beverages that most emigrants knew only as expensive luxuries from eastern cities. These springs became famous stops along the trail, where families could enjoy a natural treat and marvel at the strange workings of underground geology. Native American presence in the mountain regions differed significantly from the plains encounters the emigrants had experienced along the Platte River. Mountain tribes like the Shoshone had adapted to the harsh conditions of high-altitude living, developing sophisticated knowledge of seasonal resources and survival techniques that enabled them to thrive in environments that challenged even the most experienced emigrants. Trading relationships with mountain tribes often focused on different goods than plains commerce. Mountain peoples valued items that could help them survive winter conditions, blankets, metal tools, and firearms for hunting. In exchange, they offered knowledge of local conditions, fresh meat, and occasionally guide services for parties willing to pay for expert assistance through particularly challenging terrain. The weather in the mountains proved unpredictable and potentially dangerous even during summer months. Afternoon thunderstorms could bring hail, lightning, and flash floods that transformed peaceful valleys into dangerous traps. Snow could fall at any time of year at high elevations, and emigrants learned to carry extra clothing and supplies to survive unexpected cold snaps. Wildlife in the mountain regions included species the emigrants had not encountered on the plains. Mountain sheep navigated impossible cliff faces with ease, while bears and mountain lions posed potential threats to both humans and livestock. Emigrants developed new vigilance habits, posting guards not just against human threats but also against predators that might attack animals or people. As the wagon train prepared to leave the mountain regions behind and descend toward the Columbia River Valley, the emigrants reflected on how much they had changed since leaving Independence, Missouri. The mountains had tested their physical endurance, their problem-solving skills, and their ability to work together under stress. Those who survived the mountain crossings had proven themselves capable of overcoming obstacles that would have seemed impossible when they began their journey. The peaks that had seemed so threatening from a distance now stood behind them, conquered through determination, cooperation, and the gradual accumulation of hard-won experience. Ahead lay new challenges, but the emigrants now possessed confidence earned through trial and the knowledge that they could adapt to almost anything the trail might present. The Columbia River appears through the mountain passes like a vision of deliverance, its broad waters flowing confidently toward the Pacific Ocean and carrying with it the dreams of thousands of emigrants who have traveled so far to reach this point. After months of walking beside oxen across plains, deserts, and mountains, the sight of this great river represents both triumph and the beginning of the final, most treacherous portion of the Oregon Trail. For Sarah and her fellow travelers, reaching the Columbia in late August of 1843 marked a milestone that seemed almost impossible when they had started their journey in spring. They had covered nearly 1,800 miles, worn out multiple sets of shoes, buried friends and family members along the way, and transformed themselves from settled farmers and townsfolk into experienced pioneers capable of surviving in the wilderness. The Columbia River system had served as a highway for Native American peoples for thousands of years before the first European explorers ventured into the Pacific Northwest. Salmon runs that brought millions of fish upstream each year had supported complex civilizations throughout the river basin. The Chinook, Wishram, and dozens of other tribes had developed sophisticated technologies for catching, preserving, and trading salmon that formed the economic foundation of their societies. The emigrants' arrival at the Columbia coincided with the peak of the salmon runs, when the river teemed with fish making their epic journey from the Pacific Ocean to their spawning grounds in the mountains. This natural phenomenon provided both wonder and practical benefits for the wagon trains, as fresh fish supplemented their dwindling food supplies and offered a taste of the abundance that awaited them in Oregon Territory. Captain Morrison called a halt at the Dalles, a narrow gorge where the Columbia River compressed between basalt cliffs and created dangerous rapids that made further wagon travel impossible. This dramatic landscape, carved over millions of years by catastrophic floods that had repeatedly reshaped the region, marked the point where emigrants faced a crucial decision about how to complete their journey. The Dalles had become a major trading center where emigrants, Native Americans, mountain men, and merchants converged to exchange goods and services. Temporary camps sprawled along the riverbank as wagon trains waited for favorable conditions to navigate the final obstacles between them and their destination in the Willamette Valley. 3 options presented themselves for completing the journey to Oregon City. The first involved loading wagons onto rafts or crude ferries and attempting to navigate the treacherous rapids of the Columbia River Gorge. This water route offered the advantage of speed but carried enormous risks, as many emigrants had lost everything, including their lives, when rafts broke apart in the powerful currents. The second option required dismantling the wagons and carrying them piece by piece along a narrow trail that clung to the cliff faces above the river. This Barlow Road, still under construction in 1843, offered a land route around the dangerous rapids but demanded tremendous physical effort and exposed travelers to the constant danger of falls from the precipitous trail. The third alternative involved trading wagons and remaining possessions to Native American entrepreneurs who operated a sophisticated transportation network along the river. These experienced rivermen could navigate the rapids safely but charged high prices that left many emigrants nearly destitute upon reaching their destination. Sarah's family, after much deliberation and consultation with other members of their wagon train, chose to risk the river route. They sold their oxen to other emigrants who planned to attempt the overland trail and used the proceeds to hire a Native American guide with an experienced crew to take them down the Columbia. The preparation for the river journey required skills and knowledge entirely different from those the emigrants had developed during months of overland travel. Wagons had to be carefully disassembled and loaded onto log rafts in a way that distributed weight evenly and kept essential items dry. Livestock presented particular challenges, as cattle and horses had to swim alongside the rafts or be transported separately by specialized animal handlers. The descent through the Columbia River Gorge revealed some of the most spectacular scenery in North America. Waterfalls plunged hundreds of feet from the rim of the gorge, creating constant mists that nourished lush forests of fir and cedar. The basalt walls of the canyon, formed by ancient lava flows, rose in dramatic columns and terraces that seemed to have been carved by divine architects. But the beauty of the gorge came with deadly dangers. Rapids with names like Hell's Canyon and the Cascades had claimed numerous emigrants who underestimated the power of the Columbia's current. Whirlpools and standing waves could flip rafts in seconds, dumping families and their possessions into the cold, fast-moving water. Sarah's raft journey down the Columbia became an exercise in controlled terror and breathtaking beauty experienced simultaneously. Their Native American guide demonstrated skills developed over generations, reading the river's moods and navigating channels that seemed impossible to survive. The emigrants learned to trust completely in abilities they could never hope to master themselves. The landscape along the Columbia River showcased the dramatic transition between the dry inland regions and the lush coastal forests of western Oregon. East of the Cascade Mountains, the countryside remained relatively arid, covered with bunch grass and scattered pine trees. But as the river cut through the mountain range, moisture from the Pacific Ocean supported dense forests that seemed almost tropical in their abundance. Native American communities along the Columbia demonstrated remarkable diversity in their adaptations to different environments within the river basin. Fishing stations at major rapids like Celilo Falls resembled permanent cities during salmon season, with elaborate wooden structures for drying fish and extensive trading networks that connected peoples from throughout the Pacific Northwest. The emigrants' interactions with Columbia River tribes differed significantly from their earlier encounters with plains and mountain peoples. River tribes had been in contact with European and American traders for several decades, and many spoke English or French in addition to their native languages. Some had converted to Christianity through the work of missionaries, while others maintained traditional spiritual practices centered around the seasonal cycles of salmon runs. As September arrived and the rafts approached the final rapids above Oregon City, the emigrants began to glimpse the end of their incredible journey. The Willamette Valley opened before them like a promised land, its fertile soil covered with natural prairies and oak groves that reminded many settlers of parkland designed by landscape architects. Oregon City, the territorial capital and the official end of the Oregon Trail, bustled with activity as the 1843 emigration season reached its peak. New arrivals stumbled ashore with a mixture of relief, exhaustion, and wonder at what they had accomplished. 5 months and over 2,000 miles separated them from their starting point in Independence, Missouri, but they had completed one of the great migrations in American history. The transformation of the emigrants went far beyond the physical wear and weathering that marked their faces and clothing. They had developed skills, confidence, and relationships that would serve them well as they began the next phase of their adventure, building new lives in Oregon Territory. The trail had tested everything they thought they knew about themselves and had revealed reserves of strength and adaptability they never knew they possessed. As Sarah stepped onto the muddy banks of the Willamette River, she carried with her not just the few possessions that had survived the journey, but also the memories, experiences, and hard-won wisdom that would shape the rest of her life. The Oregon Trail had ended, but the story of Oregon was just beginning, written by people who had proven themselves capable of extraordinary things in pursuit of their dreams. The Oregon Trail ceased to be a pathway and became a memory, but what a memory it remains. As we reach the end of our journey together through this remarkable story, let us rest beside the campfire of history and consider what those brave emigrants accomplished, and how their footsteps continue to echo through time. By 1869, when the Transcontinental Railroad was completed, roughly 400,000 people had followed various routes of the Oregon Trail westward. Each carried their own dreams, their own stories, their own hopes for what they might find in the promised lands of Oregon, California, and the Mormon settlements of Utah. Together, they created one of the largest voluntary migrations in human history. The trail itself began to fade almost as soon as it was no longer needed. Nature quickly reclaimed many sections, with grass growing over the wagon ruts and streams changing course to wash away ferry sites and camping grounds. Railroad towns replaced trail landmarks, and the slow rhythm of ox-drawn wagons gave way to the speed and schedule of steam locomotives. But the deeper impact of the Oregon Trail extended far beyond transportation. The emigrants who survived the journey brought with them not just their physical possessions, but ideas, skills, and social innovations that would shape the American West for generations to come. The experience of the trail created a unique form of democracy born from necessity. When wagon trains elected their leaders, settled disputes through collective decision-making, and shared resources during emergencies, they practiced a grassroots form of self-governance that would influence the political development of Western territories and states. The trail served as a laboratory for American democratic ideals, testing whether people could successfully govern themselves without the formal structures of established civilization. Women who traveled the Oregon Trail often found their roles and expectations transformed by the demands of the journey. The rigid social conventions of mid-19th century America gave way to pragmatic cooperation where survival depended on everyone contributing their skills regardless of traditional gender roles. Women became skilled in handling firearms, managing livestock, and making critical decisions that affected their family's survival. This experience of expanded capability and responsibility contributed to the early women's suffrage movements in Western states. The trail also served as a meeting ground between cultures that had previously known each other only through rumor and prejudice. Native American tribes encountered European American emigrants in circumstances that required negotiation, trade, and occasional cooperation. While conflicts certainly occurred, many interactions were peaceful and mutually beneficial, creating relationships that challenged stereotypes on both sides. Children who grew up on the Oregon Trail developed a unique perspective on American geography and possibility. They learned that the continent was vast but traversable, that communities could be created wherever people chose to settle, and that adaptation and resourcefulness were more valuable than inherited social status. These children became adults who pushed further west, founded new towns, and continued the process of American expansion with confidence earned through their early experiences with successful migration. The agricultural techniques developed by Oregon Trail emigrants influenced farming practices throughout the American West. They learned to identify fertile soil in unfamiliar landscapes, to adapt eastern crops to western growing conditions, and to develop irrigation systems that could support agriculture in arid regions. The success of Oregon Territory's farms and the report sent back to friends and relatives in the East encouraged additional waves of migration and investment in Western development. The trail created its own literature, as emigrants' journals, letters, and published accounts provided detailed descriptions of Western landscapes, resources, and opportunities. These first-hand reports served as guidebooks for later travelers and contributed to Americans' evolving understanding of their continent's geography and potential. The romantic mythology of the American frontier grew partly from these authentic accounts of successful westward migration. Religious communities that traveled the Oregon Trail often established some of the most enduring institutions in Western territories. The schools, churches, and charitable organizations they founded provided stability and continuity that helped transform frontier settlements into permanent communities. The missionary activities along the trail, while sometimes controversial in their impact on Native American cultures, also created networks of communication and support that connected isolated Western settlements to the broader American community. As the years passed and the original emigrants aged, they became the founding generation of Pacific Northwest society. Their children and grandchildren heard stories of the Great Migration that seemed almost mythical in their scope and difficulty. The Oregon Trail became a source of family pride, regional identity, and national legend that celebrated American courage, determination, and democratic values. The environmental impact of the Oregon Trail lasted long after the last wagon crossed the continent. Overgrazing by emigrant livestock altered plant communities along the route. The introduction of eastern diseases affected Native American populations, while hunting pressure reduced buffalo herds and other wildlife. These changes marked the beginning of ecological transformations that would reshape the entire American West. Modern travelers can still follow portions of the original Oregon Trail, now marked by historical societies and preserved as educational sites. Deep wagon ruts remain visible in places where the soil and climate have protected them from erosion. These physical remnants serve as tangible connections to the emigrants' experience and remind us that history is written not just in books but in the landscape itself. The technology developed for trail travel influenced American transportation and manufacturing for decades. Improvements in wagon design, harness systems, and portable tools created by trail veterans found applications in mining, ranching, and other Western industries. The lessons learned about organizing large groups for long-distance travel proved valuable in military logistics and commercial transportation networks. Perhaps most importantly, the Oregon Trail demonstrated that ordinary Americans possessed extraordinary capabilities when circumstances demanded them. Farmers, shopkeepers, teachers, and craftsmen proved they could navigate trackless wilderness, survive dangerous river crossings, and build new communities from nothing but determination and cooperation. This experience reinforced American beliefs in individual capability and collective achievement that continue to influence national character. As you drift toward sleep tonight, carried along by the gentle rhythm of this story, imagine yourself among those brave emigrants who risked everything for the promise of a better life. Feel the morning sun on your face as you begin another day of walking beside the wagon. Hear the soft conversation of families preparing for rest as the wagon circle forms in the gathering dusk. Sense the vastness of the continent stretching endlessly in all directions, and the small but determined community of travelers making their way across it one step at a time. The Oregon Trail ended more than a century ago, but its spirit lives on in every American who believes that tomorrow can be better than today, that hard work can overcome any obstacle, and that ordinary people are capable of achieving extraordinary things when they commit themselves to a worthy goal. Sleep now, knowing that you carry within yourself the same courage, determination, and hope that carried Sarah and thousands like her across a continent and into history. The trail may be gone, but the journey continues in each of us, one step at a time, toward whatever promised land awaits in our own dreams and aspirations. Rest well, fellow traveler. The morning will bring new possibilities, and you are ready for whatever adventures lie ahead.